Hello, good afternoon, good evening, kia ora, depending on where it is that you are joining us from. We're very grateful for you choosing to spend time with us in the second session in our Thriving in a Hybrid Classroom workshop. We're really hoping that from this afternoon, this evening, this morning's session, that you're able to walk away with an architecture for designing great learning, basically being more intentional with what you're already doing and more deliberate in those actions. Before we get into that, though, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, which we are gathered. Obviously, we are gathered virtually, so there are different traditional custodians for you, very potentially, than for me. I am in Melbourne, so the lands are the Wurundjeri lands from the Kulin Nation, and we acknowledge their continued connection to the land and waterways, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And across the ditch.
Very nice, thank you. Excuse me, like clearing my throat straight away. Kia ora whanau, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, kia papatūnuku tēnā koe, ki te whare tēnā koe, ki te tupuna tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa ti hei muriora. So what I was saying there was, welcome everyone, hello. Paying respects to the earth that we stand on, to the house that we are in, and to our ancestors who have gone before us. They've got us to this place we are today. So that was my welcome to everyone, and paying respects to those who got us here. So yeah, it's great to be here again. And I love that point you made, Kimberly, about being kind of very definite about what you're doing. So we're not talking about the 5-step lesson plan that happens before you get the door. It's that designing outcomes that have things put in place to make sure that that's where you get to, thinking with the end in sight, I guess.
I don't know what you're talking about with a 5-step lesson plan. I can't imagine I ever did that as a teacher. No.
Yeah, I was guilty.
So we are very grateful once again that you have chosen to spend time with us whenever that is. This is a 3-part series, but we know that there are some people joining us just for bits and pieces of it, which is totally fine. If you are joining for all 3 parts, then there is the opportunity to get a micro-credential at the end, which sounds really fancy. I feel like I need some micro-credentials in my life.
Do we get credentials for hosting?
I feel like that we should. Maybe we can get a special micro credential for just being here at the start. Yeah. Okay, good. I think we are supposed to not talk as much as we do at the start, though, Steve, and welcome on our hosts for this afternoon's session, who will be guiding you through this very deliberate designing for learning opportunity in a hybrid world, which hopefully, is used for good next year. And I know many people are still in that situation right now as well. So we might bring on Chris and Summer and Jim, maybe?
The experts.
We can all fit on the screen, can we?
I think so.
Oh, we can. Look at that. Magic. And we can exit stage left now and hand over to these wonderful folks who are going to take you through a fabulous afternoon of learning. Thanks again to everyone.
Cool. Nice work, team.
Kimberly. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Kimberly. Thanks, Steve.
All right. I'm glad we got rid of them eventually.
Gracious.
Brutal.
No,
brutal. Two of the smartest educators we know. Come on.
They are. No, we're really happy to be here with you, really excited to share with you today and throughout this course. As Kimberly mentioned, we're looking at thriving in a hybrid classroom. So we're looking at that intentionality around learning plus design. And the first session we looked at was the first principles of learning design in a hybrid classroom. If you missed that, then the recording is available to you on the Google Classroom, and you should actually have a link to all of that stuff there. If you don't, let us know in the chat and we will absolutely share that with you. The next session, or today's session, is going to be deep diving into instructional design through technology. So really trying to understand instructional design. And interestingly, is not the antithesis of a lesson plan, but really a structure, a way to look at learning design, which is super flexible and super agile, to use that word, in the hybrid space. And then in 2 weeks' time,
putting purpose around it, isn't it, Chris? It's like do it on purpose now.
It's all about the purpose. And we are wrapping up this micro course with looking at putting learners at the heart of inquiry. So we're really trying to understand agency and learning growth. So if you do complete all of the courses, all 3 webinars, and you complete the is it simple? The short, no, the short assessments in inverted commas that you'll get at the end of the last webinar, you will indeed get one of these beautiful badges, which is a micro credential linking back to all of the content of thriving in a hybrid classroom. So we're really excited to be able to offer that. In terms of learning outcomes, we're going to go really. We looked at these last session 2 weeks ago, but we are constantly keeping in mind that when we're talking about learning, it's not just the learning of knowledge, which is incredibly important. Knowledge is certainly a powerful thing for young people to grow and to have more of, but we're also very cognizant that we're helping them to develop and learn and get better at mindsets, so different ways of thinking and different approaches to learning. We know we're constantly developing skills, some of which are very domain specific, but lots of which have some transferable elements to them, so we can transfer some of these skills. And then the tools that our young people are learning are A, incredibly powerful, and B, very applicable to lots of different areas of their life. So as we always say, while some knowledge might be domain specific, mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets allow us to have a common language of learning design where we can help not only our colleagues to understand what we're doing, maybe when I'm teaching French in my year 12 class, but really be able to transfer some of those things with the students so they can talk about the mindsets they're learning, the skill sets they're learning, and the tool sets they're using. And for today, for our session today, our knowledge set, we're going to have a model of instructional design that is flexible enough to be used in many hybrid configurations. So we are looking very much, if we're thinking of a spectrum of learning done in partnership with the young person, where the teacher is driving maybe the content and the skills. So that's coming probably from curriculum. We're in that kind of space in this next period of time. Next week, we're going to explore the other side of that, which is really looking at still in partnership with the teacher, how the young person can drive a lot more of that maybe content, product, process themselves. So we're going to look at the instructional design model today, and we're going to look at a bunch of Google tools as enablers, obviously. Mindset, we're thinking like learning designers, and some, just to pick up your point there, by learning designer, we mean we are intentionally thinking through a designed experience, because we're not necessarily, and to pick up on Steve's point, we're not necessarily in a classroom where we can use our expertise to kind of just, not that you would ever plan a lesson just off the cuff. Is that, I was going to say on the cuff, off the cuff. But that
you're
in
probably
a
more
hybrid,
likely to write on a cuff though, right? Like
you could write on it. But that in a hybrid situation, our design has to be much more deliberate. We can't, in lots of ways, we have to think, we can still be agile, but we have to think through and deliberately construct our design. So we want you to think about learning designers as ever, bring your creative and critical thinking to this, because I know that Summer and Jim and I learn as much from what you say in the chat as we share with you. So keep in the chat, say, please do all of the saying hellos, but also share ideas, critique what we're showing, ask questions, and challenge us. We're really happy for that. Skill set really is about sequencing learning, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And then the tool set, a bunch of them: Google Slides, Chromebooks, Forms, Classroom, all of those I'm sure a lot of you know. Data Studio.
I'm excited for that.
I am too. Steve, we're very lucky to have, is going to come back later on and share Data Studio with us to really do, we're going to look at data next session, but also to really, really, really deeply dive into some data. Steve's going to share some things around Data Studio. All right, we good to go?
Oh my goodness, we're so good to go. And I think, Chris, as we were talking about that idea of learning design, we're anticipating the needs a lot more. I think that's something that 2020 and 2021 have shown us operationally, we've got to kind of be looking ahead at different scenarios, planning and designing for the kind of outcomes we want and holding that process lightly. So this is why we want to give you lots of different tools for that toolkit as well. And also some of those protocols around design, and design principles are a really important fundamental piece of that. These really calibrate us quite well when we've got lots and lots of elements that we could possibly put into design. We can select a few of these to make these really contextual. Chris and I, again, came up with 10 of these last year alongside research that was done alongside Deloitte and Vic DET, and then hundreds of teachers as well. And we think that there's sort of two different elements here of that continuity of learning and that social emotional well-being. And having those kind of blocks on the bottom, as we've demonstrated here, of really starting with the human at the center, and then having a look at how we can build out a couple of other really important blocks to make sure that that learning is deep, pervasive, that it is well connected as well. So if we have a bit of a look in these in a more deep dive, I want to really point out a couple that we want to be utilizing today. When we're looking at learning design and we're really looking at, a whole structure of learning that we can use in this hybrid environment, it's important for us to think about learning design principle number 3, that connection and being together. We highlighted last week how important that is to not have an us and them, those that are in a particular space and those that are in another. It's about how we can come together through that lens of content and skill building, and how it is that we masterfully glue that together so that we do have that sense of connection, togetherness, and a journey. And of course, what's really fun about involving that hybrid environment, so we do have some of those online platforms, is that we can get those moments of levity and joy and wonder because we can bring in so many more elements at our fingertips. And I know that Jim is going to be showing us some great ways that we can explore the world from our seat, not necessarily our feet. Now, when we're looking at our second set of design principles, this is where we're looking at that continuity of learning. Again, that deepening it from either a home campus, a school campus, an on-the-road campus, a caravan campus, wherever you might be. The thing about looking at the design, the structural elements of how we do things, that Chris is showing us a model and really talking us through some of the deep questions today. We're really looking at the phases of learning, the building blocks of learning design. So when that's a design principle, it means that we can look at that deliberately, design in for those different phases so that we're designing continuity in, and we're designing a real process and a structure, as Chris said, that becomes a conversation between teacher and learner and content. And of course, it becomes then a lot more student owned when there's that consistency in place. And I think another one that we want to have a real look at here as well, Chris, is probably some of those multiple pathways. What this really allows is for us to think about our user, who is our learner. We're designing for learners and for learning. And with this, there's different points of getting from one point to another point, and not necessarily in a linear way as well. So once we're starting to use some of these building blocks, we know that we can sort of use those in an accelerated way, or we can use those in a way where there's lots of choice. So there's sort of the 4 elements that we wanted to really spotlight today from our learning design principles suite. And we did have a real deep dive last week, and we love that Jamboard where you were popping in there all different ideas of where this is currently existing in your schools. This is our go at a little bit of a framework for a hybrid learning model. And you can see that we've got unified and diverse learning culture sitting right there in the middle, because we know that a hybrid environment allows us to really amplify and accelerate that coming together, and also recognizing individuality in our learning culture as well. And I just wanted to point out something that makes this model quite unique. We've taken those design principles and almost baked them into this model here. So you can see that we've got the continuity of learning. They've got the yellow around the outside. So lots of the characteristics of hybrid learning are really based around the continuity there. And we can see that there's quite a few more enablers as well. So that continuity and thinking about those design principles are things that are fundamental to a hybrid learning model. And the red around the outside is where we're looking at our well-being, our social emotional well-being. Again, that's really nicely surfaced across all of those different elements of this model. So in particular today, we're very much looking at all of those characteristics, which we will in and have been in all of the sessions. All of those characteristics come to play. But very much importantly, we are really focusing today on the rich data in those opportunities. And we're really looking at the agility part as well. That's going to be incredibly important. And of course, as Chris said, the enablers are very much around technology, but we've got some of those signals for learning growth and, of course, some of those resources that we want to share with you. And, of course, we'd love to hear in the chat how you've been using that model. Have you been thinking about things that are part of this and starting to notice how these are manifesting, I suppose, in your week? 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks of school and of work as well. We'd love to hear about that. So, Chris, that's sort of our fundamentals, our building blocks for what we do next in terms of really designing a structure for learning.
Absolutely. I just kept muting my microphone somewhere there as well, because the dog and I are going to get to a point where we may have to go our separate ways.
I'm fine to,
I might send her to you.
I prefer the dog.
That's okay.
But I remember last time there was a scratching at the door. I remember this dog is like, let me in. This stuff's compelling learning.
She just wants to know about hybrid learning. So
who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Exactly right. So if she does start to bark, you'll hear me possibly swear under my breath, and I apologize for that in advance. And Amber, our interpreter, will sign those swear words clearly for you, so you know what I'm saying. All right. So we've got this theoretical framework, and theoretical in the sense that we've taken real practice and kind of worked backwards in lots of ways, right? We learned so much from the practice that was developed by all of the amazing teachers who are working through this pandemic, and where hybrid learning becomes a forced innovation. It wasn't something we chose to do. It's something that was thrust upon us. And, this whole idea of how do we make sure that our learners have a continuity of learning and the social and emotional connection and well-being remains that key question. What we're going to do in the next session is we're going to just take you through some very concrete approaches to learning design, super concrete, in fact, to the extent that I always worry about telling you something you already know, because I know that the educators in here are doing amazing stuff. So what I'm going to do is try and nudge and remind us of a lot of our practice and how it connects to technology. And then probably in about 10, 15 minutes, Jim is going to give us a demo of some really practical example and see how that technology supports this approach to learning. As ever, though, feel free to jump into the chat and critique this at any point. So in terms of instructional design today, we're looking at something that's called the phased learning model. And the phased learning model is a composite model of many different approaches, whether that's something like accelerated learning, whether it's at its most basic, a beginning, middle, and end. It made me laugh when Kimberly and Steve were referring to the 5-part lesson plan. And what we're looking at is something which is less structured than a lesson plan, but has elements in it which we know are important in every hybrid experience. So let's get to that. And the reason I want to bring this to your attention is what we're trying to do today is play the whole game. And by that, I mean, we're looking at the whole game of learning design. What are all of the things we're thinking about in a hybrid experience through a learning design lens? As ever, we always start with relationships. Like for me, there's certainly no question on that. It doesn't matter how great your curriculum knowledge is. It doesn't matter how great your pedagogy is, and your technology might be very shiny and wonderful. But especially in hybrid, but I think in all cases, we need to start with relationships. So we really want to understand that.
And that's one of the key enablers that we've got in the model there as well, is relationships.
Absolutely. We want to look at a model. So we're looking at a particular model today, but also how we model as educators and the behaviors we model online and how we make that learning visible to students. We're looking at collaborative practice. So how do we help students to connect not only in a social and emotional way, but also in a cognitive way? So how do we get them to work together and to learn together? I just put up there in brackets, we are crew, which is the what's the word? The motto of one of my favorite schools to work with in Doncaster in England, XP school, and that is their motto. We are crew, and it comes from the idea of I think it was his name has just totally slipped my mind. It'll come back. The Outwards Bound founder. If anyone wants to Google that, it's like a pub quiz. Tell me who the Outwards Bound founder was. That'd be awesome.
I can only think of Bear Grylls, but I'm probably wrong.
I've met Bear Grylls somewhere. That is a story I will tell you later. But Kurt Hahn, I think it is. So anyway, he talks about we are passengers, not crew. No, we are crew, not passengers. Makes much more sense. So that the students are really working together to learn. They're not just being in there and sitting in there. So yes, this idea of collaborative practice, and obviously great questions. Thank you, Gareth, Kurt on. We're looking at building the learning in phases and also the considerations, as we always do, differentiation for support and for challenge, agency, and also feedback. So this whole game of learning design is super complex. We're just going to say that. It doesn't have to be complicated. And that's why we're going to use a model to help us to uncomplicate it. But we have to accept and enjoy, in fact, that it's actually quite a complex process. So I'm going to now share the model of phased learning. Yeah, no,
love this model. Love it.
So what we're going to do is, I'll just bring up the whole thing. Oh, one more. What we're going to do is, this is not a lesson plan in the sense of you start with a hook and then you go through each of these sections and then you've finished. What this is if you imagine it's more like a recipe. In fact, it's actually more like the ingredients in a recipe. So if we're going to design really great hybrid learning, we would argue, and based on, as we said, lots of practice and also research, that we need a hook. And I'm going to go through these in more detail in a moment. A hook, an overview and outcomes. We need some input, whatever that looks like. We need some time, space, structures, resources to help students to construct their understanding. We need a way to demonstrate, to demo learning, so we can see what children are learning. And also we need an opportunity to reflect on how well we are learning. So you could design a hybrid learning experience which starts with a hook. I'm pointing at my screen, which you can't see, but anyway. Starts with a hook. Then goes to an overview, then has some input, then has some construct, then has some demo, then has some reflect. And that's fine. But we know the reality is, in fact, that it's going to be much more cyclical and much more, let's do a hook at the start and some overview and outcomes, and then some input, and then actually let's go and do a little bit of construction, and then some reflection, and then back to some input, and then to some construct, and then to some demo. So all of those kind of, it's a really flexible model is what we're saying. It's not something that you would need us to do in a specific order. It makes sense to have hook and overviews at the start, but I would always argue that I would be reflecting during a hybrid learning session as much as possible, and definitely not just at the end of it. So what I'm going to do is to share some share some examples of these and how they work, and give you a little bit of kind of some guiding questions about how you might use these. Now, there is a lot. This is like a master's in learning design in 15 minutes.
MicroMaster.
A MicroMaster. So what we're going to do is we're going to share all of this with you afterwards. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly, and then I want practical examples. So Jim's going to fill in and paint that beautiful picture. But what I'm going to do is share quite a lot of content in a short period of time, knowing that you've got the video, but also we'll give you the actual slides so that you can revisit them and reflect on them. a little bit.
It comes like a bit of a playbook, doesn't it, Chris?
It very much does become a playbook somehow. I love that terminology.
Yeah.
All right. And Timothy, thank you. Using exemplars to help students see what is expected can be really powerful. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you for and all of those comments are so enriching for us. Yes. All right, let's go. So the hook, and I know, by the way, that I say this in a weird accent. So I'm not like it's the way I say book as well. People are like, what do you mean? And I say hook in the same way. What I mean by hook is literally like a hook. How do you hook people in? How do you hook young people into the learning experience? And in a hybrid classroom, it is more important in some ways than, in fact, in what we might call a face-to-face classroom, because we need to be able to allow students to cognitively and also emotionally enter the hybrid classroom. I'm doing a lot of air bunnies, but the end of
like allegedly. This is true. The one in there, Chris, number 4, when I'm trying to highlight how this is incredibly nuanced for hybrid learning. This is good learning design, but where it's nuanced for hybrid learning, number 4, fostering positive relationships with and between learners, potentially even more important to do deliberately in a hybrid environment than ever.
Absolutely. And we know that the whole thing about the challenge of student disengagement, especially when you have students online and potentially students in school or in situ, so like that whole disengagement. And if you've got everyone online, which you would still argue is a hybrid approach, we've got everyone online, that question of engagement, like how do I drag them in at the start to get them excited, engaged? It doesn't have to be edutainment. It's not like it is deeply about learning, but absolutely how do we connect with those learners, both intellectually and also in a social and emotional way. So the purpose of the hook is stimulate interest and curiosity and set the scene for learning, present a purpose for learning, helping learners to see why. So why am I learning this? Why is it important? Connect the learning to real world experiences if you want to. Foster positive relationships with and between learners, a great opportunity to do that. Reactivate previous learning and connect to new learning. So in terms of things like Rosenshine's principles, which we mentioned in the blurb, but also all of that stuff around cognitive load theory. So all of the research currently looking at the science of learning, and always, by the way, the art of teaching. So they're often slightly different things. That idea of how do you make sure that you're helping kids to connect to the learning, and how do you we talk about interleaving, so how do you kind of space learning out, and how do you reconnect to what's been learned previously so kids can connect to what's coming. So the hook is a perfect opportunity, and start the learning experience with a higher order thinking. The antithesis of a good hook for me, and I'm gonna become really unpopular here, but that's okay. I'm pretty unpopular anyway. I'll roll with that. So. Thank you. Is doing the role. Now, what I mean by that is not like I've seen people do the role brilliantly, where they introduce like different questions and all sorts of great things. But I've also seen the start of my learning experience is me waiting until someone calls out my name. So I think that there's an interesting thing. I'm not engaging with learning. I'm just sitting waiting. Like, how do we get kids hooked in learning? In England, we used to call this bell work, and it was the idea that as soon as the bell had gone, like kids were already connecting with learning. I don't like the term bell work for a number of reasons, but they're already being hooked in and connecting with learning right from the start. So the way we structured this, by the way, is we kind of give you the purpose. We give you some guiding questions that as a designer, you might ask yourself. And then we give you some examples. And as I say, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and then I'm going to pass over to Jim, who's going to kind of paint a picture of how he has done that with a unit within Classroom. Just reading the things. Oh, Gareth, the role can be a powerful cognitive switch. Absolutely, it can be. It depends how you use it. And I'm actually very pro using that as a great way to make sure that you have interacted with all of the kids and actually connected with them. All right, so the guiding questions for a hook activity. So when I'm sitting down to think, okay, I'm going to design something which is going to hook the learners into my hybrid learning experience. Is this activity going to be synchronous or asynchronous? That goes back to our characteristics. Am I doing this live? Am I going to do it? Is it a pre-recorded thing, or is it an activity I want them to connect with in an asynchronous manner? How do I use my hooked activity to refresh and reactivate prior learning? Will learners be able to start and get on with my hook activity without a great deal of support from me? Like, is it low access? What will I be doing during that hook activity? So if it is a 10-minute activity, what am I doing? I could just have a cup of tea, and that wouldn't be a bad thing sometimes. Like, we sometimes need that. But how can I get more formative information, for example? How can I interact with individuals during that time? And how do I get learners to share back on their hook activity? So all of these things are going through my mind when I'm designing this hybrid learning experience. And things like as simple as ideas for hook activities, see, think, wonder, Googleable and ungoogleable questions, odd one outs, all of these templates which we are sharing with you. And I'm not going to go through these because I know Jim is going to share a couple of these in his practical approach as well. But we've given you, and we'll continue to give you, tons of templates about how we can actually hook students in really quickly. So, for example, a see, think, wonder is a great, simple, really simple one. It could be as simple as using chat, putting up an image, and getting kids to do that thinking routine. It could be using Google Slides and Google Classroom, the way we've described in the last session, so that it becomes a bit more formal as well. So, and Janine, awesome, thank you. Jeopardy-style buzz in while marking the role and during the hook, brilliant.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that idea.
All of those really neat ideas, please keep sharing them in the chat. So that's our kind of our ideas for hook activities. And as I said, Jim's going to color these a little bit more as we go through. But then, okay, I'm now onto my purpose of sharing the learning outcomes. I feel like I'm teaching a granny to suck eggs, which is a weird expression. And I know you all know the purpose and the importance of sharing learning outcomes. But I just want to bring it back to the idea that we're in a different paradigm when we're in the hybrid learning piece. So it's so important for us to not only share and co-construct the learning outcomes, because we are not necessarily in close proximity with the students, so that we can help them, kind of nudge them, and they say, "Oh, I didn't quite understand what we're going to learn. Can you help me with this?" So the idea of transparency becomes so important, that students understand what they're learning, why they're learning, how they're learning. It also allows them to take that responsibility, right?
Well, yeah, and it builds that trust, which we know, again, is an enabler. And I would even go one further and say that's an accelerator of the hybrid learning as well. So through those structures and through this sort of purposeful sharing, a lot of that trust is built, which is critical.
So some of the design questions that I ask myself when I'm doing this is, okay, and I know this is seems the most basic of all, but it's, what are the knowledge sets, mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets that learners will engage with in this lesson? How can I help learners to see their own growth in each of these areas? And really importantly is, do I have an opportunity to co-construct any of these with the students? So could we say, this is what we're going to learn? What skills do you think are you going to bring to the table? Or what tools would you like to bring to the table? And the ability to have that conversation and to co-construct some of these learning outcomes, I think, is really powerful. And two super ideas, super quick and super, but super quick ideas. The first one is a concept bubble. Now, we talk a lot about this idea of cognitive load. And if we were to think about the idea of learning at its fundamental base is taking information, processing that information from the short-term memory, or the working memory, as we probably call it more contemporary terms, the working memory. We take that through and process it and put it into our longer-term memory in the form of a schema. And by schema, I mean things are connected together. So I'm taking some new information and I'm connecting it to my experience, my knowledge that I already have, and I'm building this schema of understanding. One of the challenges in learning, I think, in learning design is how much of that cognitive load can we reduce by sharing with the students the pre-built schema, coming back to Tim's idea of using exemplars, for example. So if we can share what a concept looks like, then we can help kids to say, you don't know all of this yet, by the way, and that's fine. There's lots of new learning to come, but this is what it looks like as an overview. And I always give the example of saying, it's like the gingerbread, I can't remember what's it called. I was going to say Jack and Jill. I'm mixing up all of my nursery rhymes, but it's
I'm like trying to follow you.
Yes. What's the gingerbread house one with the witch?
Yeah, I did. The ginger. Yep, we know where you're going with it.
So what I'm saying is, do we want to leave crumbs in the woods for the kids to follow, so they only get to see like the next crumb, or do we want to show them the whole gingerbread house?
Yeah,
and that's very, 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 very challenging around.
Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel.
Thank you so much, everyone who saved my backside. Belle, Anne, and Janine, and Gareth. Thank you. So Hansel and Gretel. That idea of they follow the breadcrumb trail. Is that what we want for kids, or do we want to lift their head up and let them see the whole gingerbread house, even though they don't know how it all works yet? They have a visual of where they're going, I guess. And so,
would you have advice for that, Chris? Because I'm thinking sometimes you do want to breadcrumb parts out, and sometimes you do want to show them the whole part. So there's no kind of right or wrong. That's fairly contextual, right?
So it's very contextual, and it can be contextual to the learner, because that seeing the gingerbread house can be very overwhelming for some learners. But also, I've always found, to be honest, let me show you the gingerbread house, and then the breadcrumb trail makes sense, because you can see why those breadcrumbs are going together. And that's probably an excellent point. We probably don't want to go to the gingerbread house.
I was thinking that myself, and I was like, but we see where you're going, Chris. We like it.
But the idea is, can I see the house, or am I just going to get the bricks? It could be any house. It doesn't need to be a gingerbread house. So a concept bubble is whenever I'm creating learning design is where I start, and I will map out what are the key concepts that the kids are going to learn in this next period of time. I will connect them. How do they connect? So I'll actually it's basically a concept map, right? How do they connect? And also I use the bubble size to tell me what the relative importance of that concept is. So bringing together exactly a mind map, Janine, is basically what it is. The reason I call it a concept bubble is, and we're not going to get into this, is using solo taxonomy to understand the interconnectedness of the pieces of a concept allows us to assess that concept really well. So that's why I work in the concepts, and I look at the relative size of the bubble as to the importance of that piece of the concept and how they connect together. So yeah, absolutely, a concept map. Another thing, and I'm sure Jim this is in Jim's part. How do we share those learning outcomes visually, and how do we get kids to track them? So we can have a look at that in a minute. And then I'm just checking the time here somewhere. I'm trying to go slow, as Tim says, or Timothy, whichever one you prefer, says, one of the things that is coming across in your approach is to actually slow down and let the learning happen, not rush through the content as a classroom focus. 100%. I love that comment. Oh, and Tim got another one.
It is a great thing to do.
Absolutely, Tim. And one of the things is I give the students, there we go, Tim. I give the students the concept bubble. And one of the things we used to do was you would color it in as you move through it. So I can see the big picture, and I don't know a lot of this stuff, but as I move through it, I can literally, and this is year 12, by the way, literally color in those bubbles, or highlight those bubbles as I move through that. And I get to see the connections. And that's learning. That's building schema, is building connections. So yes, we could talk about this forever. The input phase, new information, spaced learning opportunity, multiple inputs. We can interleave, especially in the hybrid. In classroom, we can allow kids to revisit that input so much more than if it's just, by the way, Tuesday 9 o'clock for 35 minutes. It is really important.
Yeah.
Guiding questions for input. So where's the input coming from? How long will the input last? Do I want longer input, or do I want to chunk it down? And this is coming back again to Tim's point, to make it really understandable. Olivia, the slides will be coming onto Google Classroom. They're not there just yet, but they will be. What are the learners going to be doing during the input? Because that's really important, right? Is if I've got a video input, what are the students doing? Are they just passively receiving that video, or do I want them to be doodling, drawing a mind map, or, whatever? You're thinking through these things.
The call to action.
Yeah, exactly right. And how am I capturing any questions that the learners have about the input? So, for example, that idea of using, how much we love Jamboard some, but if I've got some input, me too, is I can have a question and answer wall on a Jamboard. And then how am I checking for understanding? And my favorite checking for understanding technique has always been, I can't say this either, by the way, with my Geordie accent. Pose, pause, pounce, bounce. Pose, pause, pounce, bounce. Pose a question. Pause for a significant amount of time. Pounce, so choose a student, and there are lots of really interesting ways to do that. And then bounce that student's answer around. And so rather than me saying, and I think the analogy, which I've heard someone use before, is the idea of if Summer and I were just playing table tennis, like I'm asking a question, Summer answers, I ask a question, Summer answers, I ask a question, Summer answers. But rather it becomes much more like I ask a question, Summer may answer, but then that answer gets passed on to someone else for critique or for building on, and it gets then passed on or bounced to someone else so that they can add to that. So rather than having high stakes, right or wrong questions, and someone feels under a lot of pressure, it's actually collaborative community building. So if you imagine Tigger, pose, pause, pounce, bounce, pose the question. Pause, give significant thinking time. If it's worth asking the question, it's worth giving thinking time. In the early 2000s, there was research in England that the average time between a question being asked and responded to in class was under 2 seconds. I think it was 2.1 seconds.
What?
That to me says the question's not good enough. As in, it's not challenging enough. Or it's the same person who is always there with their hand up in class who's answering that question, and everyone else is not having an opportunity to chat. So, and how you do this in classroom is so many options. We've got the question this within the classwork. We've got the question tool, but even just starting a conversation in a threaded chat in classroom is a wonderful way to do this. Alrighty, ideas for input, screencasts. I'm going to rush through these because I'm going to pass over to Jim in just a couple of minutes. Screencasts, rich texts, voiceover slides, all of that stuff is awesome. Live Google Meet with experts. Why not connect out to experts? I know some of you've done a bunch of work around the zoo and or particularly the zoo, actually doing some amazing stuff connecting real life.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
It's pretty amazing, right? Okay, we've only got a couple of bits to go. Construct, giving learners time to build and add to their mental schema. Tim, goes back to your really relevant point, helping to reduce that cognitive load, slowing down so that later you can actually go faster. So rather than skating across the thin ice, really stopping and digging in. Practice, 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 whichever spelling you want to use there. But that idea of giving kids opportunities to practice and significant opportunities to practice. In terms of guiding questions, I'm like, what activity best helps the learners to construct a deep knowledge, a deep understanding? How am I getting them to think? How much time am I going to allow for learners to work independently, alone, or in groups using breakout rooms? Are learners going to do this independently or collaboratively? And which digital space are the learners going to be in so I can call them back together when needed? So this is a really interesting challenge in hybrid. I might have some students in class with me. I might have some students online. I might want to mix up those in class with those online in breakout rooms. So there are lots of really interesting questions and challenges. I feel like we're giving more questions than answers today, but the whole idea is it's contextual.
I think it's good. Yeah.
So Google Form quizzes, graphic organizers, jigsaw activities in Google Meet breakout rooms, tons of ideas around construct. And as I said before, Olivia, we're going to give you all of this text so you've got it. And lots of critique. So the idea of giving students critique. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in 2 weeks' time. The demo, show what you know. Demonstrate skill acquisition and tool usage. Create a point-in-time assessment for feedback and feed forward. So we often talk about this idea of a proxy for learning. How do we see what students have learned when learning happens in their brains? So unless we MRI scan them live during class, it's very hard to see whether or not they have learned and deepen their understanding. So what are our proxies? And this demo is a proxy for learning. It allows us to have an understanding of where they're at, give them some feedback, how they've gone, and then some feed forward, what they could do, target set to move forward and to improve. There's some brilliant chat happening here. Thank you so much, everyone, for jumping in there.
Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? Yeah.
So good. Okay, guiding questions for demonstration or demo is how are learners going to demonstrate what they've learned, and then how are they going to demonstrate how they've learned in terms of mindset, skill set, and tool set as well. And how are you going to capture learning growth in these areas? So ideas for demo. Jim is going to get in like 1 minute, Jim. I'm nearly done. Ideas for demo, creating video, creating infographics. We talked a bit about Canva, I think, a couple of weeks ago. The idea of creating infographics, making a slide deck, any proxy for learning that allows for feedback and feed forward. So whatever the students do, you're able to give them feedback, and their peers are able to give them feedback and also feed forward. Right, the last piece, and then I am definitely finished. The purpose of reflect, because metacognition and reflection on the learning process are key. So it's so important that if we're not explicit, and this is what we said before, this isn't about, people do this all the time, but if we're explicit with young people about it, it makes them better at reflection. So we're talking about how do we improve ourselves as learner, and how do we practice agency. So as we know, agency is not something that we can give to children. They already have it. What we can do is to help them we can help to create the enabling conditions so that they can practice their agency, that they can absolutely have choice and voice. And in the case of reflection, have responsibility over their learning. I've just done something in the demo. I'm really not happy with it. This is why I'm not happy with it. I'm taking responsibility for that, and I'm going to get better at it. All right, so guiding questions. How are learners going to know they have grown? And not in height, although some of them have. I bet when you haven't seen them for 18 months. How will we celebrate their growth as a learner? And also, what language can we use to talk about learning and being metacognitive? So we talked a little bit about this, and we're going to explore it even more in 2 weeks' time, is that idea of things like reflection journals. And we're going to give you an example reflection journal today, using this idea of a growth ladder to talk about how we can get better at these specific skills like asking great questions, reasoning, metacognition, etc. So I just realized I meant to re-stick the model in there, but that's okay. We'll come back to that. We'll give you the graphic for the model. But that's how it all kind of hangs together. So what we're going to do now is we'll give Jim a second to get himself ready. And hello.
I'm ready.
Always ready. I think, well, if that's with your permission, I'm just going to sit out for a minute. And then you and Sam's is gonna be the wing person for you, showing us what some of this could look like in practice, Jim, right?
I love it.
Sounds
good.
Thanks for that, Chris.
All right, let me just switch over the screen. Hello, everyone. Hi, Summer.
Hey, Jim.
Hi.
Hey,
And
Jim.
hi,
This
Amber.
is very cool. I love how this like contextualizes this beautifully through this model. And I know this is on the Google Classroom already, right?
That's right. Yeah, this is in the Google Classroom. So many of you are signed up for it. So if you're not, we need to get you signed up for it. But you can just watch the screen. If not, you can jump over into Google Classroom and check it out. So Summer, I always feel bad about this because you know, I'm a New Yorker. And so I'm doing something on New York. I always feel like I should do this on Melbourne or something like that. But
No, New York's cool. And it's one of those fantasy places that, you know, people like one day I'll get to New York. You're a New Yorker and you're even still feeling like that, right?
yeah,
One day.
that's right. It's been a couple of years. It's been a couple of years. So look, I think this is just a great opportunity for us to use Google Classroom, especially in this hybrid environment. You know, a lot of the conversation we could do live in class, and many of us have. But when we start to consider that there are some kids who are going to be at home and some kids who are going to be live, how do we offer a spot for everyone to get in and be able to access that material? And so here we are in Google Classroom. I've made a topic, so you know we can make lessons. We can use topics differently to make lessons inside of Google Classroom. And so in this particular topic is just the entire lesson. You know, I know some of us use topics for dates or weeks or something like that, units. But in this case, I'm using a topic for a lesson. You know, you can have up to 100 topics in a Google Classroom. So if you have more than 100 lessons, don't do this. But you get the idea. So here we are. So what I've done is I've named them so that way they're pretty, they're obvious to us. So let's just take a look at them. So we have first, of course, the hook. And I've done this in a different way. So let's just say this is a lesson on maybe something around New York in the 20s, you know, accessing the Great Gatsby, the Harlem Renaissance, you know, the building of the Empire State Building, whatever it might be. I'm a real history nut when it comes to New York. So here we are. So what I've found is this beautiful video from the beginning of a film by Rick Burns. So it's on YouTube. I've grabbed it. It's just I maybe even it's called Intro to New York, I guess. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. I'm going to try to play it, Summer. So hopefully you can hear it. Let me just see if I can get that to play.
Sure.
Can you hear the cars and the clarinet?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's just watch for a second. All right, so maybe I shouldn't play all of that in this way because it's I love it. I was about to watch all of it.
I was settling in, you know.
I was about to watch all of it, but what it is it's a poem. So let me see. It's actually from The Great Gatsby. Let me see if I can just jump to it.
Until gradually, I became aware of the old island here, that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes.
Anyways, it's I'm so geeked up by it.
I know the one.
What happens here in this video, it uses The Great Gatsby and then it, you know, juxtaposes it with images from today, with this soft music and these sort of faded, slow pieces. And I love it for the language, the poetry, you know, the imagery, the music, all of the pieces that I think would excite or at least create what were you calling it before? You know, levity, you know, like maybe I should say
joy and wonder. Yep.
And I think so being able to introduce New York in that way allows me as a teacher to be able to show you, hey, this is what I think New York is. And then what we can do is we can add a piece in here, this document that we see here, just to get kids accessing the same document. Everybody can edit. You know, I think what you guys are calling it is like fostering positive relationships between learners and getting kids to share what they think they saw and then be able to comment to it, be able to go and say, oh, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I saw. This is what I feel. These are my thoughts. And be able to get kids to comment back and forth just using a simple Google Doc. So just from the back end of it, remember that you can share a document where all students can edit, as opposed to they can just view the file. Everybody gets their own copy. And so that's what I've done in this particular hook. I love the concept. I love the ability to use that video. And remember, because it's in classroom, we can go back and watch that video a number of times. So if somebody in that document is saying, oh, I don't even know what this word means or something like that, then other kids can go back and listen for it and see how it was being used contextually. The idea of the hook using that is one of my favorites in this lesson. So the next piece we would have here is the overview and the learning outcomes. So obviously we're identifying it. But you see this right here, this thinking canvas thing that I've written here?
Yeah, I see that. I see that.
That's a category. And you can go into your settings and come down here and mark categories. And you can actually give categories, something you've identified as a category, a particular amount of points. And but if in this case, I'm not worried about the points. I'm just trying to identify that in this particular section, we're going to use thinking canvases. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So here, if I open this up, here's a pre-beard video of Jim talking just about an introduction. So I'll just sort of click on it just to give you a sense for what that looks like. I should shave this off now that I'm looking at that.
No beard, Jim.
Oh, here we go. Maybe that's not going to play for me right now. I know you want to. All right. Anyways, you can watch it on your own if you want. And it's there it is. No, it's not going to play.
Oh, you know what? It's just saving you from yourself because you're going to get too nostalgic.
That's right. So what I've done in that is I just did a quick screen capture of myself, right? Just like a video of myself, and I used WeVideo for that. WeVideo is a very simple program where I can grab media, especially if I have the premium version of WeVideo. I can grab stock footage. So what I did is I just found images of a busy street of New York, and then I was able to go in and added some music. You don't need a huge, you need some background with like how to edit, but it makes it fun. What kids are getting access to is my face, my voice, just something personal. So those kids who are not in the room are getting that sort of same experience as if I was in the front of the room presenting. And then I'm also giving everyone here a journal, just a reflection journal. I think Chris shared this maybe last week in a different way. But I love these.
I didn't, Jim. This is the other one which I didn't. So this is a brand new, exciting resource for today. It will be going into classroom. I'm just going to do that right now.
I love it.
Awesome.
I know some people.
Thanks,
some people today were there last week too.
Yeah.
Where did he go? Did he just disappear again?
He just, he runs off. Yeah.
That's right. So it's a great journal. So I'm actually giving the kids somewhere to capture their thinking, right? And
Nice.
so in this journal, everyone would get a copy, and then they could go in. And there's lots of activities throughout this, maybe to reinforce some of the learning that they're doing in this unit, or something that just sort of complements what you're seeing in these topics or in these.
And
lessons.
that's your signal for their learning growth as well, right? Like that's
Absolutely.
yeah, that's really nice. I love
It's
it.
good. It's a really, there he is again. Hi, Chris.
I can't, I'm not even supposed to be in this section, but you know how much I love this stuff. So I just get excited. Can you show the Kanban board number 4?
Yeah. Yep.
Because I wasn't sure if we were going to show that, and I love this.
Yeah, I do too.
In terms of
Consistent
measuring,
structure.
gives
So
you
good.
some structure. Like what's the knowledge set, and you can, and because each student has their own reflection journey, they can move these cards around. So the content, the knowledge set, is on those kind of pink and blue cards in that column, and you'll see the red, yellow, the red, amber, and green. That allows the kid to move that up and down to say, this is how I feel, that I am self-assessing against this current knowledge set. So they might all be red at the start, and then as they get dragged down, they start to see a little bit of that progress. Goodbye.
You can't just leave. You can't just drop that bomb and then just walk out, right?
Well, you can in a hybrid learning environment. You sure can.
It's perfect. Anyways, so this reflection journal, this is in there for you to be able to grab and make copies of it, and it's really, I think it can be really helpful. I would wonder, what are you thinking? It would be another way for you to get, to get kids to capture their thinking. You could maybe think of a Google site, something else. So maybe if you're thinking about that in the chat, what else could you be adding here as opposed to, anybody who's ever seen these things knows that we love Google Slides for thinking canvases. Like, we love it.
Love them. I mean, a Jamboard is another way to do that, of course. And
there you go.
Different video reflections, like kind of the Big Brother couch. That's what is so good about hybrid is, in fact, the ways in which you're seeking reflection have to be so much more diverse, not just one kind of traditional way as well. Before it slips my mind, Jim, I just wanted to say how what you've constructed here already hits my 5 markers of the characteristics that I've got: synchronous, asynchronous. I've got this, online space, and I can see how this manifests in a classroom. Obviously, incredibly flexible pedagogies that are in here as well. You've really had to build up your teaching toolkit, but importantly, because of the nature of what you're doing, it's also anchoring us to place, and a different place. And for you as the instructor here, you're amplifying that sense of like, this content matters, or like this topic matters, and your passion, I'm already super passionate about it. So those 5 characteristics, this is such a great showcase of those.
I think that's an interesting point, Summer, because often as a teacher, it's so important for us to insert ourselves into it. Because that's what we are passionate about. And so when kids, the kids learn from that experience, so they don't have to go to New York to love New York because of my story about it, right? Oh yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at. I'm looking at the time. Do I have 45 minutes? So here, here's input, right? So we talked about that. I think Chris shared that. My kids just got home, so you may hear that in the background.
Right. All good things.
So in this case, so it's just sort of sticking with the theme. You have the great. It's like Chris's dog. I can't. Except will you take the kids too, Summer? Okay.
Oh, big call. Big call. Finding some, just picking up the slack.
Anyways, so the Great Gatsby has been done so many times, so there's probably lots of resources for us. I would be really particular about what I share and how I share that. In this particular example, we just grabbed a YouTube video from the Great Gatsby. Obviously, this has been done so many times, so you have plenty of videos to choose from. And then here's just a PDF, a simple PDF that we can read. And then one of my favorites is this 20 fascinating images. So creating that opportunity for wonder, getting, really digging in, and what I love to call deep reading of images, looking at what is in this image, why did the author intend to have this image, those sort of things. And this is such fascinating material that you could share. And this is obviously what Chris was talking about before. You could even share a link to a folder, a Google Drive folder, what I would call maybe a digital kit that has maybe music from the 20s, a video from the 20s, and, some sort of writing or a text from the 20s.
What this part reminds me of when we're talking about being designers, it's as if you've got this like nice new apartment, and this is like your interior design for this, right? You've got that structure of this is that strong scaffold, and this is the parts we can have so much fun with. Designing that learning, decorating that learning, putting that awe and wonder in, putting in all of those different kind of parts that are those hooks as well, and deeply personalizing the learning too. It's very, very cool. Like I'm excited about this as a structure that you can use over and over again, and then all of those trinkets you can put on it.
Oh, that's so true. You could just leave the skeleton of it and just replace the text and the other things. If we go into constructing knowledge, there's lots of examples. I think Chris did a good job of sharing these in here. So how do we, here's just a simple notes page. When it comes to this notes page, I was looking at this earlier, and what it's like what questions and prompts, and I'm not sure what's kind of like the Kanban board that Chris was just sharing, but we could also even insert something like this, just a think, puzzle, explore. Like, this is what I think I know from that content. This is what questions I still have. And then how might we explore those other puzzles? So just lots of opportunity in here to be adding those. That's what makes this with Google Classroom so much, so good. I think there's even here just a cause and effect piece from one of Chris's thinking canvases. So this is always really good, right?
Yeah.
And then let's just jump here to demonstration. This is where I really think I feel this is, you know, an opportunity for kids to showcase, you know, what they've learned, right? And giving it some agency, you know, that choice, voice, and responsibility that I think you mentioned. This opportunity here. What ways can we allow students to showcase what they've learned, but in a creative and sort of student-centered way? I have a film background. I was a film teacher, so of course I have video, right? So video is always my thing. It's always going to be my thing. I love making videos. I love being able to show that. WeVideo just happens to be my favorite. And then of course something like Soundtrap. Soundtrap is audio. So getting kids to maybe do like a podcast audio interview. I don't know. You don't have it here, and I try to watch for it. In America, we have NPR, National Public Radio, and it's glorious.
I mean, I'd probably be like the ABC here a little bit, right?
I know. I keep watching the ABC, hoping it'll be the same. But the reason I share that is because they do there's beautiful examples of sound projects. So how do I introduce music and sound and the what we would call natural sound of a place, then mixing it in with interviews and, you know, of all sorts of folks. So anyways, a couple of examples here. Obviously, it would take you a little bit of background to introduce those to your students. But I think with just a little bit of background, kids could run with all this. So what else? What other ones would be in here? What other ones do you think? Put that in the chat. What other ways do you think kids could demonstrate in this hybrid environment? You know, what other applications? I mean, we could, of course, you know, create, you know, some sort of I don't even think of the name of it. Some sort of model or whatever it might be, you know, with construction paper and.
Oh yeah, like a diorama kind of thing or a prototype. Yeah. You know, one thing I've been working with some students recently who are in that kind of hybrid space, and it does make me think with these demonstrations, one of their kind of briefs for us to give as well, the fact that it is hybrid, we need to not just create a demonstration that's only for one delivery models. So even if you are creating that diorama or that in situ model, how might you deliver that so that our friends who are maybe online can interact with that as well? So it actually deepens the knowledge and it deepens that understanding of how we need to demonstrate our learning for a range of audiences almost simultaneously. So that's something that we might talk about a little bit more next week. But in what points do we invite students in to be part of that co-design of acknowledging that hybrid environment, just like our teachers are as well?
Oh, that's such a great point. You know, your comment reminds me, and I don't have it here to show, but I once saw a student's diorama that they made, you know, cardboard and glue and stuff. And then they green screened themselves walking around their diorama.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
I know. It was like, what? And and the students that made it walked around, like they just green screened themselves in here. And the one kid was sitting on like a pile of pebbles. And they explained to you what you were seeing in this diorama. It was mind blowing, you know. I'll try to remember to share that example. So cool.
Yeah.
Look, and then the last piece here is reflection. And you know, I like to think we want to make it easy when we do this. So in Google Classroom, if you go in here, you know, obviously you can just ask a question. And so the question, you could do a form, like you could have a form with deeper questions. But I think for me, just being able to get them to just reflect. And I was looking at this because I think Chris helped me with this piece right here. Because when I was reading this, and I love this here, my effort and application was low in this learning task, and I'm disappointed by the outcome. And I can't help but imagine myself in high school reading that and then thinking to myself, I need to be doing better, right? Because the reality of it is when I was in high school, the task was for you, the teacher. and I really didn't care how you felt about it. Like I didn't. Whereas you're asking me how I felt about it, that changes everything, right? That changes everything. So I really love the language of these questions. I think Chris was talking about that before. Just being able to get kids to really think, to reflect on their own performance was such a beautiful way to finish this off. So,
yeah,
well, that is me.
So good. And thank you for that example, because I know that we're able to build upon that in that Google Classroom as an important part of that sort of tool set as well. And again, what we're saying, and this is, I guess, a tricky concept to almost get our head around, but that consistency of structures is such an enabler for the trust and the security and the deeper learning. It's not saying that we want all of these structures to be, exactly the same in every classroom, but it does aid collaboration if there's a particular design process or particular design scaffold to go through as well. It's not about homogenizing what we do. It's about actually just having a shared language so that we can level up.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Jim. Absolutely awesome. What I'm going to do is just show you my little Chromebook here. So this is just a really simple, very, very simple. Let me just put it in present mode so it's easier to see. A really simple design canvas to help you when you're using the this model. Like if you want to, you can print one of these out and just write on it. You can actually, we've got a Jamboard version, so if you wanted to use sticky notes, but the idea is just a really quick hybrid design canvas, overview of the learning experience. What's my hook going to be? How am I sharing the overview? What are those learning intention success criteria? And then learning activity 1, and then ICDR. So is it input? Is it construct? Is it demo? Is it reflection? Because obviously, as we said before, you don't have to go in sequence for these things. You can mix it up. So there's just a little canvas for you, which we'll share into Classroom. All of the resources, as ever, will go into Classroom for you at the end of today's session. So thank you so much, Summer and Jim. Absolutely amazing. What we're going to do now is, I think Summer is probably going to drop out for a little while. So I'll see you soon, my friend. And I'm going to ask Jim to bring Steve in. Kia ora, Steve.
Kia ora, Chris.
So happy for you to be here, my friend. Now, I think you're actually going to share your screen, right? So I might remove my screen.
Yeah, I might as well. I mean, I just found myself just kind of staring and listening the whole time that was on. So just fantastic.
So good. And Jim does such a great job with Summer adding some amazing kind of comments in there of making it practical. It's how this is what it really looks like in something like Classroom. So the reason, Steve, you're on is because we love you, obviously, number one. But secondly, because one of the things we're interested in, and we're going to explore a little bit more next time, is how do we track learning growth and understand how students are interacting and learning and engaging in a hybrid model. Now, if you enjoyed what Jim just showed you, and I did, and it blows my mind every time I listen to him, this bit might blow your mind. Okay, so I'm just giving people a public health warning. Now, what we're going to do now is kind of really look at the back end of data and what data we can get from the admin console and from Google Workspace, which allows us to better understand how the kids are interacting in a hybrid environment. So I'm going to hang in here, and I might mute in case the dog starts, but I'm going to hang out with you for a little while, and you're going to share us some pretty awesome things around using data in a hybrid environment. Over to you, mate.
Cool. Thanks very much. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about stuff that kind of lives behind the curtain, I guess, and give you an idea of what's built into the admin console inside Google for Education. And one of the big pieces of Google for Education is this admin console and the power that it brings to someone who understands how to drive it. And I know for some people you might not have access to this. You might have someone who looks after it for you at your school, or you may have someone at a state level that looks after this. But I want to explain this because there are lots of things that are available to the front end teacher that can be enabled by the back end, if you like. So I will attempt to move quite slowly here because it is fairly complex. So you may have seen the meme in the top corner there with Woody and Buzz, data everywhere. And it's interesting when we look at exactly what there is inside the admin console. And so I've got a little snapshot down the middle of this section where when you open up the admin console, and if you have the access to it, you understand this. If you don't, this will kind of look at a lot of stuff that's in there already. And with Workspace for Education Plus, it unlocks a lot more, but there is also a whole lot of this built into fundamentals as well. So when we have a look inside the admin console, there are a couple of things. Now, from the Education Plus version, there is a security dashboard, and this dashboard here gives us a whole range of things. Within that, we can look at something called highlights, and highlights gives you a look at what is the storage that you're using. This is a chart of files that were shared externally. So there's a big spike here. I can see where things have been shared from my domain externally, and if I thought maybe I was not sharing stuff externally, that can give me some ideas of what's in there. Now, there is also information around login, around settings, around spam, and all this is automatically being logged in the background of your domain. And remembering that this is inside your domain. This is not being shared externally, it's inside your domain. Now, what we're going to look at is the ability to do something down the bottom here called a BigQuery export. And my apologies to our amazing translator who's trying to keep up with all these weird words I'm using here. You're doing an amazing job. So BigQuery is a way of exporting data out of our domain and visualizing it in some way. Because thinking about what we're talking about here is actually how do we use data to inform what's happening in our classroom, to have a look at which students are engaging with work, which students haven't logged on for a week, but then conversely, who logs on every day, who hands in everything, but also who's logging on late at night, who's working at weird hours. So this can give us a lot of ideas and a lot of information about some conversations that may need to be had with certain students. So that's a bit of a look at some data that we can take out. And as I said before, this data sits inside all different editions of Workspace. I'm going to have a look at some of the Education Plus version because I want to really have a look at that idea of the BigQuery data export. Understanding data is actually a great discussion to have with students as well. So some of this you might look at and go, I could use that with my students as well. Maybe not this bit, maybe the next bit. So shooting across the next one, I've called this logs, logs, and logs. So everything that happens inside your school domain is logged automatically. And this is a great big list of stuff that you can't read because I realize it is very, very small. Up on the top right has what's called the audit log, and that's looking at who's done what, who's handed in what when, who has taken something back. And I used this with a discussion with a school recently who said, look, I've got this student who's not getting any work. So we're able to jump into the logs in the background. And I said, oh, well, they opened it here, they handed it in here, and they took it back here. So there's a whole lot of information of things we can see in the background of what's going on. Down on the left-hand side is looking specifically around Drive, around who shared what, who's created what, when were things handed in. So the kind of idea here is that there is a lot of stuff that sits in behind and is being collected about what our students are doing that is kept inside our domain. So Chris alluded to a really cool tool called Data Studio, or Data Studio, depending on how you're going to say it. And Data Studio gives us the ability to visualize data. However we get that data, there are lots of different ways to get it. So I'll jump over really quickly and have a look at what Data Studio looks like. So you'll be able to get access to these slides, and I have put a whole lot of links on here because I'm going to kind of just go over what this is quite broadly. So Data Studio, there's an example on the right there, and this is what's called the classroom activity report. It gives you a way to data, and the data could be through what's called BigQuery, where we pull data in from somewhere, or it could be as simple as visualizing what's on a spreadsheet. So you can connect this studio to lots of different data sources. You can share it with your team or with the world. You can collaborate on this. You can build templates and share the templates that people can then edit. Now with BigQuery, you can set it to automatically drag data out once a week, once a month, whenever you want to run these reports. So that's kind of a look at what Data Studio looks like on this page. This, as I said, it's the ability to visualize your data. So at the top is another view of that classroom engagement report, looking at students, looking at how many assignments they've turned in, any that was turned in late, any that weren't turned in, how many questions they've answered. So this is pulling all that data out of Classroom that you just saw before with all that work that was going in there. You can analyze that data and visualize that data. The one down the bottom, the geography teacher in me loves it because it's all about world population. And so this is pulling data from lots of different data sets and visualizing it. And each of these little pieces here are customizable. So each of these is pointing to a data set. And you just point it to your data set. As your data set updates, it visualizes it. So this one up the top here is looking at students. And as you run a report, it will update that information. So it's a way that you can create individualized reporting for your school, for your class, for your domain. It's shareable or not, just like any other Google product. And you can take out certain things that are pertinent to certain people, okay? So on here, there are some links through to how to create these reports. There is a lot of resources to help you with these. There are some great video resources, which we'll have a look at the end, but there is also a whole Data Studio community that discuss and share. So I'll click forward one. So as I said before, we can connect our data to lots of different things. So we could use a sheet in the background. We could use a database using that idea of BigQuery to pull stuff in. We can upload files like CSVs. There's also some tools that are available to have a look at things like Facebook, Reddit, Twitter. So all the feeds that are coming out of there as well. And there's a link there to learn about how to connect data to a Data Studio dashboard. So what do you need for Data Studio? For Data Studio, you just need some data and a dashboard, okay? If we're thinking about BigQuery export, BigQuery is available through Workspace for Education Plus. It's built into it. It runs on many different things as well. So it is actually a tool to interrogate data. Now, if you're going to have a look at using BigQuery, you do need to set up a cloud account on Google Cloud. Now, Google Cloud gives you certain tiers of how much data you use. Now, I've been using this for a little while with my bunch of students, my pretend students I've got, and I'm sitting below the level that actually begins any bills being created. I'm sure my colleagues in cloud would not be very happy to hear that because I'm using the free bit. So you do get a free allowance every month. If you want to build more grunty data, more and more investigations, you may end up having a small cost for the data you use, but there is a whole lot of information there on what levels of data you might want to use. For most schools running a report once a month, they're probably not going to hit any tier where it incurs any bills. So we can do this for free. So that's what we need. That's what it looks like. And there are some links on here. What I'll do is I'll quickly jump over to show you what that classroom activity report looks like. So this is a classroom activity report with some students you may recognize. Mr. Malfoy, Mr. Weasley, Miss Weasley, Mr. Potter, Miss Granger. So there are a bunch of students here. This is anonymized student data. So each one of these sections is pulling from a certain piece of data. So by setting this up to connect to my classroom logs that I looked at earlier, it'll bring this all in individually. So I can have a look at this as an overview of my school. So I'll let this run. It will pull in all the data that I need to see, and it builds me a whole lot of reports. Now you can customize each one of these for whatever you want to see. So if I want to click over to students, where it was before, or I can look at classes. And again, we can look individual classes, we can look at individual teachers, we can look at individual students, but this is 100% customizable to what you want to see in your school. And the ability to play with Data Studio and build something to visualize data is really helpful as a school to look at what's going on, as a teacher to have a look at your students. But also, if you give your students a whole spreadsheet of data, show them what Data Studio is and let them have a play at visualizing the data, they begin to understand what big data means. So there's kind of two parts to Data Studio that I see. The ability for students to actually understand what big data means, but also the ability for a teacher, for a group of teachers, for a school to build some bespoke reporting for their school that helps them out. So this template is available. It was on the Workspace update blog, and you see there's a big button at the top there where I can just click Use Template. It will give me that template. I can then connect my own data to it and customize it to how I want. So that's a real quick look at Data Studio and understanding what sits in behind your admin console. Now, it may be that someone has to set this up for you, but now you can kind of understand the information you can get out of your information that's being automatically logged. You know, and if we jump back to the student one, if I have a look at Mr. Weasley here, I can see that there were 304 late submissions of his 2,400 submissions. Hasn't answered any questions, but has done all the activity, which is great. So this is a way to start to think, well, that's pretty important, or maybe it's not. But two takeaways are, it's automatically collecting this data in the background, and you can customize this to whatever you want it to be.
Amazing, Steve. It just gives us such a, and thank you for doing that. And we only gave you a compressed period of time, and you did a brilliant job. Thank you. I know that Amber is going to leave us at 5:30 exactly, so we're going to start to wrap up now. And we can hang on for a couple of minutes if there are other questions. But absolutely brilliant. And what I love about that is it allows you to start a dialogue and ask questions like, what's this data telling me? What am I learning from it? I think it's such a powerful thing. And I know that you and the rest of the team are working to simplify this as for teachers so that they don't have to kind of worry so much about that big data. But I think that was fascinating to share that. Thank you so much. I think what we're going to do is everyone is going to jump back on and say goodbye. That was absolutely brilliant. I learned so much in that. There we go. Looking at that data piece, but also from Jim and Summer and those practical ideas. There are a few questions in the chat which we will try and get to. But what I want to do is to flag that next time, Wednesday, 19th of November.
It's actually the 17th. It's the 17th.
Oh, Summer, thank you for checking that.
Oh, that's okay. Only know that it's the 17th because on the 19th, I've got a whole bunch of students who are using their agency and inquiry and data to pitch to the minister in the Northern Territory. Very cool stuff.
Amazing. You are absolutely right. So the 17th, what an idiot. I apologize.
No, you're not.
So in Wednesday in 2 weeks. So we're looking at how might we put inquiry, curiosity, and joy at the heart of our learning, and how might we empower learner agency and create opportunities to create a porous classroom. So connecting out to the world through inquiry. So really excited to do that. We will look forward to seeing you live in 2 weeks, or if you're watching the recordings, we hope it was really useful. And we will put all of the resources onto Google Classroom and send a follow-up email tonight. I often forget to send a follow-up email until quite late because I want to go and eat something now. But it will definitely get to you really soon.
Sounds so good. Do we finish off with our awkward wave?
Awkward wave time. Thank you so much for hanging around. Take care. See you.